is no question that it is the action of young people in communities across the globe that has brought urgency to the climate crisis and a demand for increased accountability. Young people have been the world's conscience, fighting to end the systems that put profit above people and planet. And our spotlight interview is with one such youth leader, an extraordinary young woman from Uganda, the climate activist Vanessa Nakate. Inspired by Greta Thunberg to start her own climate movement in Uganda, Vanessa began a solitary strike against inaction on the climate crisis in January 2019, after witnessing droughts and devastating flooding in communities across her country. For many days, she was the lone protester outside the gates of the Parliament of Uganda in Kampala, a sole voice to begin with, but her message gathered momentum and support, which in turn led to her founding of the Youth for Future Africa and the Rise Up movement, both dedicated to environmental justice on her home continent. Vanessa has also started the Green Schools Project, a renewable energy initiative, and an incredible example of the creative and innovative thinking in which we all need to be actively engaged and enabling. Vanessa is a UN Young Leader for the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as being named as one of the BBC's Global 100 Women of the Year 2020, and in February this year was named as one of Time magazine's 100 Time Next cohort. Vanessa has challenged all leaders to leave their comfort zones and see the danger we are in and do something about it. So let's take up that challenge today. Welcome, Vanessa, and thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So first of all, Vanessa, can you just share with us a little bit about your kind of awakening to the climate crisis and your journey to becoming part of the climate strikes movement, as well as the work that you're doing now. But tell us where it all began for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. My journey started in 2018. It was at the time that I started to carry out research to understand the challenges that the people in my community and in my country, Uganda, were facing. And of course, I found a number of challenges, but I was really surprised to find that the climate crisis was one of those challenges and actually the greatest threat facing our lives right now. I remember in school studying about climate change, but I didn't get the education about the reality of what was happening right now. It was more of, the theory of what climate change is and, what we can do about it. And it felt like it was something that we wouldn't have to worry about, something that would come in the far future or something that already happened. So we were safe. And my research was showing me the reality of what was happening right now and some of the impacts that I got to discover. I had already seen and watched on the news, like, the floods, the landslides. I had seen these things unfolding in Uganda, and I hadn't connected them to the climate crisis. So it was at this moment that I, decided to start striking for the climate. And my very first climate strike was in the first week of January 2019.
Okay, and tell us about that, because I think initially it was just you. I mean, you took that kind of quite a bold step to decide to actually take that action yourself. It's one thing to care passionately about something, but to actually say, no, I'm going to go and do something about this. That was quite a brave thing to do. I mean, how did that feel in the moment when you did that?
Yes, when I found out that the climate crisis was really affecting the people in my country, I started to look for ways on how to, help the people in my community. And it was that time that I got to find out about the Fridays for Future that was started by Greta. And I was really inspired by Greta to also start striking for the climate in my country. However, I didn't start striking immediately because I was extremely scared to go to the streets. I was extremely scared to face many people on the streets, as naturally I'm quite a shy person, and it was hard for me to just stand on the streets and have everyone's attention on me. So it took me a time to actually start striking for the climate, and that's why I ended up starting my climate strikes in the first week of January 2019. And my very first climate strike was actually on a Sunday. I remember it was a Saturday, and it was at this moment that I realized that I had taken so much time without doing the climate strikes because I was scared, and I just decided to face the people, to face the public, and to expect whatever response I was going to expect, regardless of what I was feeling at that time. So I decided to do the climate strike that week, but then I realized that I'd actually already missed the Friday strike since it was Saturday. So my very first strike was on a Sunday. Like I said, I felt like I had taken so much time, and yet a lot had to be done and a lot had to be said. And I remember that Saturday evening speaking to my siblings and some of the cousins who had visited at home, telling them about the climate strike and asking them if they could join me. And that Saturday night, we made a number of placards. And on Sunday, we went to do the climate strike. We actually struck in 4 different locations. Again, like I said, I felt like we had taken, so much time, and a lot of time had been wasted without me starting the climate strikes. So that is how the climate movement really started in my country, with my siblings and my cousins, when we went to different locations within Kampala to demand for climate justice.
And how, I mean, it's incredible just to think of taking that step, and I hear that sense of urgency that you felt in terms of taking that action. But how was it before other young people started joining you?
It actually took quite a long time after that first strike, with my siblings. I remember they had to prepare for school, and my cousins had to go back to their homes. So I had to either invite young people to join me for the climate strikes, and was basically looking at the people who had been at school with. And of course, I reached out to a number of them and told them where I will be holding my climate strike, in Bugolobi, that is like a small town within Kampala. And I remember going to the strike that day on Friday the following week, and standing there for like 30 minutes, and no one had sent me a message, no one had called, no one had told me that they were on their way. But in the next half hour, a friend showed up, and I was surprised that he actually showed up, and we stood there for more 30 minutes, and then we marched to another stage as we were holding the strike placards. He could join me sometimes in the strikes, but other times he couldn't, until when he finally had to go back to school, and school was really far away from where we would do the climate strikes. So that's the time that I continued to do the strikes by myself, and getting other young people to really join. I think that really started to happen around October, when I was really telling my friends that I've been doing this for months, and the climate crisis is affecting not just my future but also your future, and we are already seeing the impacts even in our present life. So you have to join me so that we can demand for a future that is healthy, a future that is livable, a future that is sustainable for all of us. And at that point, those who were willing to join said that they couldn't, because they felt like the climate movement was mainly for young people, was mainly for teenagers at that time. If you remember, the media would report climate movement led by teenagers. Teenagers in Europe lead the climate movement, or in the United States. So many of them felt like this was a movement for teenagers, and we were in our early 20s, just after college. And that's the time I asked them if we can form a group and call ourselves Youth for Future. So we can call ourselves Youth for Future, but then continue to do the climate strikes. And Some of them really identified with being called Youth for Future, than feeling like they would be a part of the movement, but then the media will be reporting teenagers, and yet they are not teenagers. So that's when we started Youth for Future, and many of my friends started to join the climate strikes. Sometimes some of them would do their own strikes in the places where they were staying. But even before that, I had started going to schools to speak to students about climate issues, and also sometimes during the climate strikes, with them within the schools. It's not easy for us to hold, the big, large strikes that we see in Europe or we see in the United States. The situation is much more complicated for us. So in that time, I would visit the schools and speak to students and chant with them and organize with them within the schools. And this is something that continued and became much easier when some of my friends joined Youth for Future, because now I didn't have to go to the schools by myself, and I didn't have to do all the work by myself. So we were sharing all the work and working together. And in January this year, that's when we decided to, sorry, not this year, last year, 2020, that's when we decided to change the name from Youth for Future to Rise Up Movement. So now we identify ourselves as Rise Up Movement, but the origin of Rise Up Movement is actually Youth for Future.
Amazing. It's incredible. And it's, I suppose it just shows that, I mean, and we've seen this so often, but sometimes it just takes one person to stand up, and the others will then say, okay, well, if they've been brave enough to do it, I will do it also. But it takes a lot. I suppose I'm just really, I find it very moving, that idea of you and your one friend or a couple of friends just saying, no, we're going to keep doing this. It's an incredible thing. And it's led now to amazing things. I mean, tell us about the work that you're leading now and that you're involved in now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Some of the work that I have really been working on, especially with the Rise Up movement, we've been, of course, joining the climate strikes every Friday and organizing the global climate strikes in Uganda. And we've continued to reach out to schools and educate students and carry out, climate education within the schools, so that students really understand what the climate crisis really is, so that students really understand their connection to nature and the part that they can play to help make this world a better place for everyone. However, when the pandemic started, most of that work or in the schools was put on hold, because we had to stay at home, and also schools were closed during that period, and then they were open for a short while, but again they are closed again. So we kind of stopped doing the reach outs in schools, but we've also organized reach outs in communities to speak to the people about climate issues. Not everyone will understand the IPCC report. Not everyone will understand 1.5, especially in these communities. But when we speak to people in communities and explain to them how the climate crisis affects their access to food, how the climate crisis is going to affect their water sources, and they will struggle to find something to eat and struggle to find water, for to drink or for their own home use. Many people understand, how they can be able to to work within their communities to educate more people about what is really happening. And the other thing is the Bash Green Schools project, which you talked about. And this involves the installation of solar panels and eco-friendly stoves in schools. And this was started because I wanted to drive a transition to renewable energy in the schools in Uganda. We talk a lot about how we must transition to renewable energy, but not everyone is able to access it. Not everyone is actually able to afford it. So through the Bash Green Schools project that receives support or donations from different people, we are able to make these installations possible. We are able to put these solar panels in the schools, and also we are able to provide the eco-friendly cookstoves. In my country, almost every school uses firewood for preparation of food, so that means many trees are really cut down, so that schools can use as a form of firewood. And the eco-friendly stoves, they do not completely eliminate the use of firewood, but they greatly reduce on the amount of firewood that schools use in the preparation of food. So that those are some of the things that we've really been working on. We've also been working on campaigns like Stop ECOP, that is the East Africa crude oil pipeline that is to be constructed, in East Africa. We believe that we cannot have, any pipeline construction within a climate emergency. When it feels like we won't be able to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees, then we cannot allow any construction of new coal power plants or construction of new oil pipelines, because at the end of it all, we cannot eat coal and we cannot drink oil.
And it's a really powerful. I've seen you sort of in your placards and so on social media. I've seen that a really strong message. And so tell me then, Vanessa, from that work that you've done in your own country, you've also that's incredible enough, but you're also now doing huge amounts at international level. The work with the UN. You've been to New York. You've been to Davos. How did that happen, and what has it been like being involved in those international experiences?
Yeah, I remember when I started activism, actually for like 7 or even more months. I had no idea that there existed climate conferences. I didn't know anything about these things, so I didn't know about the COP. I didn't know about youth climate summits. I didn't even know that these things were held in different parts of the world. And how it really happened for the youth climate summit, I received an invitation to attend the youth climate summit in New York, and I was honestly surprised. And um, I felt happy because it felt like people were actually watching what I was doing, and yet I thought people were not watching what I was doing. So it really felt great to meet many other climate activists in New York. And also when I went for the COP 25 in Madrid, it was also great meeting other activists, and the same thing in Davos, because these are places of, we always organize online, but in these places you get to meet in person, you get to organize together, you get to mobilize together, you get to speak and understand, the challenges that people are facing in their countries. You get to understand the actual stories that are, people are facing in specific communities. I may understand exactly what I'm seeing in my country, Uganda, but I may not have a full picture. I may not have a bigger picture of what is happening in Kenya, or what is happening in Nigeria, or what is happening in Europe, or what is happening in Asia. But when I meet an activist, from those specific, places from different parts of the world, I'm able to hear their story and understand why they are protesting, why they are demanding for, justice from the government leaders, because every activist has a story to tell, and every story has a solution to give, and every solution has a life to change. So some of these invitations that I've got to these conferences, I've always been told, we've been monitoring your work, and we see how you've been demanding for climate justice, and powerfully speaking truth to power, and demanding leaders to listen to the science. Yeah, basically that is what I'm always told when I get some of these invitations. And being there, the experiences are always wonderful to meet other climate activists. Activism is not an easy journey. I can say it's not an easy thing to do, but when I know that there is an activist in this place, if I need a time to rest and to take some time off, I know that another activist is speaking up. And if they need time to rest, they know that I can also speak up for the same thing. So it has always been a great experience to meet with different activists from across the world.
Yeah, that's incredible, and that sense of community as well, in terms of what you're kind of talking about. And I mean, just thinking about, I mean, this event that the IoD is kind of hosting is very much focused on leaders and those who are in charge in organisations, and we have to, if we're talking, across the kind of the generations, I suppose, in some ways, we've seen so often, as you've said, that young people and young leaders talking to those in power. I mean, what do you think that leaders and those who sit around the boardroom tables in companies and businesses, what do you think they need to do right now?
I think that they need to listen to the science because the science is very clear. We are in a climate emergency. We are in a climate crisis. We face a challenge of not limiting global temperatures to 1.5 degrees because of the continuous burning of fossil fuels, because of the continuous rise in global temperatures. I can say that at 1.2 degrees, it is already hell for us. It is already hell for communities in my country, communities across Africa, communities across the global south. It's important to know that we may all be facing the same storm of the climate crisis, but we are definitely in different boats. Those at the front lines of the climate crisis are least responsible for the emissions that we are seeing. Historically, Africa is responsible for only 3% of global emissions, and yet Africans are already suffering some of the most brutal impacts fueled by the climate crisis. Talk about the floods, talk about the landslides, talk about the droughts, talk about the cyclones that have destroyed and ravaged vast parts of the African continent and destroyed many people's livelihoods. So the climate crisis is here now at 1.2 degrees. But then the scientists warn that if nothing is done right now, we won't be able to keep or limit the global temperatures to 1.5 degrees. So the report, the IPCC report that came out scares me to think that if we cannot limit 1.5 and yet 1.2 degrees is already hell for many communities, how worse is it going to get if leaders don't do anything about this? So I think that what leaders need to do is to listen to the science, to listen to the activists, especially activists from the most affected communities who are seeing the impacts of the climate crisis right now. And also to add that when leaders listen to the science, we want them to take real action now. Leaders many times talk about halving emissions by 2030, by 2040, or going net zero by 2030 or 2040, but they allow for more decades of environmental destruction. They talk about net zeros of 2030 while opening up new coal power plants. They talk about net zeros of 2040 while constructing new oil pipelines. If we are to really limit global temperatures to 1.5, if we are to see meaningful action from the leaders, not empty summits, not empty promises, not empty sweet talks, action has to start now, not in 2030.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of that, when you're speaking to leaders or you are part of young people speaking to leaders, um, do you think leaders are listening to young people? What's that experience like when you're in these rooms in Davos and so on? I mean, what's it like? Do the leaders listen to young people?
I think that the leaders can hear young people, they can see young people demanding for action, but they're actually not listening to us. Because I personally believe that when you listen to someone, then you react or, you take action, to what they are saying or to what they are demanding for. I may be speaking and you're hearing me, but then it feels like I'm actually making noise for you and you're trying to block that noise. But when you listen, you quietly pay attention to what I'm saying and then you do what I'm demanding for. So I don't think that leaders are listening to youth activists yet.
Okay, okay. It's a really powerful point that the difference between hearing and listening is an incredibly powerful point. And obviously, we're speaking to you from Scotland. The eyes of the world are going to be on Glasgow in November when COP26 is here. What would your message be to those who are attending COP26?
To the leaders,
Yeah. Yes.
I think it's something that I've already said. Just listen to the science and take the necessary action for the people and for the planet. It's time for leaders to put people above pipelines. It's time for leaders to put communities above coal power plants. And I think this really starts from listening to the science. It really starts from understanding that we cannot eat coal, we cannot drink oil, so we don't need anything from the fossil fuel industry, because it's causing and has already caused massive destruction of our communities, massive destruction of our homes. And also to listen to communities of the most affected people, and areas. So what I really expect from the leaders at in Glasgow this year is to listen to the scientists, listen to the activists, especially from the most affected areas, listen to our stories and take meaningful action right now. We don't want to hear your sweet promises, because many times they end up being empty. We want to see real action being done right now. We also want leaders, to look at solutions that we know can work right now. Many times leaders will, talk about solutions that need massive investment, research, development, but there are solutions that we know can work right now. For example, educating girls. Project Drawdown lists 100 things that we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And ranked number 5 is educating girls on family planning. So it's important for leaders to understand that when we educate more girls, it means that we are not just it's not just the individual benefiting, but it also her family, her community, and also the planet. So it's time to consider solutions that we know can work right now, as they can think about those solutions that need more development and we don't even know when they'll be put in place. But it's time to find solutions that we know can work right now, and also help communities, especially communities in the global south, to transition to renewable energy.
Fantastic, wonderful, and that focus on girls is a great way for us to also think about these issues and think about how widespread some of the solutions are that we can bring to this as well. Vanessa, we've actually reached the end of our time together, but I'm really so delighted we're able to speak with you, and I'm really struck by that point that you made earlier about every story has a solution to give, and every solution can change a life. That's something that I'm going to be remembering from this conversation and taking forward in the work that we do with the IoD. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.